Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mr. Mohammed Sidibé.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here. Before I begin, I would like to thank our host, UAE. Last month, UAE became the first Arab nation to donate $100 million to the Global Partnership for Education to ensure that kids everywhere around the world have access to quality education. So let's give a round of applause to UAE. I would also like to apologize for my voice. I'm going to attempt to recite something, and I have an awful voice, so apologies in advance. Who is fighting to save Sierra Leone? They said, as they blindfolded my eyes and made me shoot in the distance. RUF is fighting to save Sierra Leone. When the blindfolds were removed, I saw the holes our bullets had pierced and the bodies that lay there lifeless. RUF is fighting to save our people. We were killing them and made to believe we were saving them. RUF is fighting to save our country while being forced to burn our country down, house by house, village by village, city by city. RUF is fighting to save Sierra Leone. We were killing our country and our people. Go and tell the president, Sierra Leone is my home. I no longer had a home, for I had set it ablaze. Go and tell my parents, they may see me no more, for the real me died when I was only 5. When fighting on the battlefield, I'm fighting forever. If forever meant dying on the battlefield before I was old enough to tie my shoelaces. And so it goes. At age 5, the Revolutionary United Fronts came to my village and played God on the lives of those I loved. From then on, I knew that my life would be changed forever. I didn't know how or in what direction, but I knew one thing for sure. The people that took me from my home were not good people. Their faces were as pale as sheets of paper, lips dry, cracked and barren, eyes bloodshot, their voices raspy, and no matter how hard they tried to smile, they couldn't. What made him smile was what made him human, and what made him human was long gone. The smile on my face had disappeared. My innocence had been lost. My toys had been replaced with an AK-47, and the sudden change in my life was too quick to be true. I couldn't grasp my new reality, so I kept wishing it was a dream. This dream lasted for over 4 years, and when I awoke, my reality was as hopeless as my dream. I was orphaned, uneducated, and homeless. In 2001, I was a 9-year-old boy angry at a world that had stolen my childhood away from me, destroyed my country, and prevented me from going to school. When war ends, the scars left behind often last a lifetime. However, I was given a chance to go to school. My educational journey began with UNICEF. UNICEF brought in school supplies at a local primary school in exchange for being admitted. Without them, I probably would have never seen the inside of a classroom. But it wasn't just UNICEF. It was also the International Education and Resources Center, IERN. This center connected students from Sierra Leone to students in the global north. It was at IERN that I first became fascinated by the power of connectivity and the possibility of global learning. IERN taught me the importance of education. IERN introduced me to a group of elementary school students in Canada who sold pizza to keep me in school after UNICEF had left. If it wasn't for them, my education would have also ended before it even began. But it wasn't just them. You see, when I learned how to read and write, I felt powerful, because there's nothing more powerful than understanding the power of education. But more importantly, the help that I received from the first responders made me realize the importance of education. For I was taught to think with a pen in my hand instead of a rifle. That's the power of education. My life is one big oxymoron. In 2007, I was invited to give a speech at the US. Being on campus that day, I realized that I too could dream, that university wasn't just for the rich and powerful, that it was also for students like me. So upon deciding to stay in the US by myself, I was soon enrolled in a public high school. It was then and there that I understood the inequalities of our educational system. It was then that I realized that my 4 years of schooling in my slum in Sierra Leone did not adequately prepare me for a life outside of my slum, let alone an American high school. But I fought my way through. I had nothing left to lose. It took all but 8 years of quality education, opportunity, and access for me to graduate not only high school, but to obtain a bachelor's degree. Moreover, 5 months from today, I will begin my first year of law school. Fact: 6 out of 10 children who are in school are not learning. Fact: of the estimated 1.6 billion young people come 2030 will lack the skills they need to contribute to the global economy. Fact: 9 out of 10 former child soldiers that I knew that did not receive quality education or skills training are either in jail or roaming the streets of Freetown. Fact: my education has given me agency and has brought me here today. I was one of the 264 million children that do not have access to quality education. Imagine if we can give them access, what they could do. I believe that they could build nations far greater than the fictional country of Wakanda. For far too long, youth from the global south have been bystanders to development and innovation. You see, we've been bystanders not by our choice, but by the geography of our birth. We have stood by and watched the world send women and men to the moon. We're watching as the world raced to create a human colony on Mars. Just 3 weeks ago, Nokia and Vodafone announced that they're creating a 4G network on the moon. Imagine that. In an age where globalization, connectivity drives great success and opportunity for companies like Apple, Facebook, and Google, we can and must do better. We can no longer wait on anyone, because every one of us in this room, if we work together, we're capable of ensuring that every child on this planet have access to quality education. We can do it. It's just a matter of will. In my home country of Sierra Leone, people were quick to conclude that the devastating civil war and the Ebola epidemic are the genesis of our weak educational system. But I beg to differ. You see, these events are a byproduct of a failed system. Somehow, our politicians believe that there is no direct investment in education. There's no direct return on investing in education. There's no immediate return in investing in education. Such myopic thinking has over the years reduced the amount of money allocated to our educational system. To be ready for the 21st century, students must be taught critical thinking, globalization, technology familiarization, lifelong learning skills, and more. But it saddens me to say my home country, Sierra Leone, lacks in each and every one of these categories. You see, our leaders run on the platform of we're going to provide employment for all the youth. But they never run on the platform of providing quality education. It's simply a matter of necessity versus sufficiency. In order to provide sustainable employment, we must first do that which is required. Educate the young people within that community. But yet it's always, we're going to educate, we're going to employ the youth, but never about educating them. Here's a word of advice to the various ministries of education and world leaders here today. Stop promising us jobs while simultaneously reducing funding for education. At the GPE conference last month, I saw what we could achieve when world leaders, the political capital, the business sector, and young people come together with the will to act. That we have the power to change our generation. That we have been provided with an opportunity, we have been provided with a gift, and that gift is we know exactly what we need to do to ensure that no kid is left behind, because I promise you, every day that we deny a girl or a boy from Nigeria to DRC, from Syria to Yemen, from Myanmar to India, from Guatemala to Haiti, access to quality education, come 2030, we are going to live in a very unstable world. So the time is now. I said this last month, and I'm saying this again. I'm not here to ask you to change the world. I'm just here to ask you to do what must be done, to do your part, to make the possible attainable. That's what I'm here to do. To conclude, in our solidarity statement last month, you often hear world leaders saying that we're fighting for the right of key people who are not here. But the reality is, the youth, we have a voice. We're not asking you to give us a voice because we have one. What we're asking you to do is to provide us with a platform of education so that we can be prepared for the future. Because the future is grim if we do not do what needs to be done. I am a byproduct of a fortuitous education, and I will not be here today if I did not receive the quality of education that I received. So please, let's stop kidding ourselves. And as we go ahead with this conference, let's remember that we have the possibility of tapping into the great brain trust of kids from all over the world, not just kids from the global north, but kids from the global south, because we are the future. Thank you.
I'm sure we can manage a huge round of applause again for Mohammed Sidibe. Your Excellencies, friends, on behalf of the Vaki family and the Vaki Foundation, I warmly welcome you to Dubai. When we started thinking about what the theme of our conference should be, we realized last year that what really works is something that's large and captures imagination. Last year, our theme was, how do we make real global citizens? This year, it is about the future. How do we create young people ready for that future, 2030 and beyond? We conducted a survey in anticipation of this conference that we released some 2 weeks ago. In there, we polled 29 countries, 1,000 people in each country, and the results are quite revealing and quite stark. What we found to do with the theme was that 2/3 of parents believe their schools are preparing their children for the future adequately, and you're all very pleased. We also found that 2/3 of parents also feel very optimistic. I shouldn't fall. Two-thirds of parents felt very optimistic for their children's futures. I find this very fascinating. If you take those findings and then you juxtapose what's around the corner and you ask any expert, I guarantee you speak to anyone, and you say to him, what's going to happen in 2030? The usual answer is, we don't know. I think only the climate scientists in this room can tell us and forecast up to 2050. But if you remember Tom Friedman's speech here last year, he said that the mobile phone is going to die by 2023, 2024. Just imagine the birth of a technology, mass adoption, change the way that we consume everything, and it dies within that same period. Can you think of a life without your iPhones? It's quite tough. So when we think about the theme, there are two particular aspects that are relevant. The first is the Sustainable Development Goals that were set in 2015. We know that they expire in 2030, and we know that we're way off course in education. That is not a secret. So what is it that we need to do to make sure that every child, as Mohammed said, whether from the global north or the global south, actually benefits from equitable growth and development? And the second is, 2030 is not an abstract concept anymore. A child that enters school today, and assuming there's 12 years of schooling, will graduate from that school in 2030. We're not talking about a future that we cannot realize. Children today will graduate in 2030. What is that future? So that is why we have organized this conference. That is why we have set this theme, to make sure that we, all of us in this room, have the opportunity to listen to some incredible speakers, some experts on diverse areas, and not just to do with education, that actually helps to inform our practice in the classroom, our thinking on education policy, and how we allocate our resources. Now, this conference is pretty expansive and very expensive. Lucky my boss smiled. A round of applause to him. How do you make the most of this conference? You know, there's a lot going on. I don't know if you've downloaded the app. If you haven't, that's the first thing. Please download the GSF app. It's on iOS and it's on whatever the other one is, which will be irrelevant. I beg that you're punctual in attending all these events and all these side meetings and everything that's going on. Please be punctual. Everything's going to hopefully run on time. And the third thing is, last year I heard, and there was only 1 or 2 people out of 4,000 who said, we didn't learn anything. I said, really? We didn't learn anything? Well, there's no chance of that this year. We have some of the most incredible people, prolific speakers, and just the most extraordinary thinkers on subjects as diverse as, if you think the future of plastic, my friend Neil is here. If you think about climate change, again, we have the foremost experts here. If you think about the aging society, we have experts here. If you think about cryptocurrency, that is here. If you think about almost any area, you'll find some level of expertise at this conference being used as a platform to actually educate all of us who are in this room. And furthermore, all those people who are watching on live stream, on YouTube, on Facebook Live, all of these different platforms. So please, if you do leave here without knowing anything, trust me, the problem's not with me. So, what are the key formats? Many of you have come in the past. Let me just do a quick poll. Who's here for the first time? Put your hands up. Wow. That's a pretty spectacular number. So, I hate panel discussions, and that's no secret. So we don't call them that. That's the trick. But we do have other formats, and friends who have been here in the past will speak to you about our replica House of Commons debate chamber, where we have polarizing debates, where you go at it, and we actually encourage our speakers to have a point of view, make a difference, put their perspectives across. And many of you in this room have commented on how great a format that is. This year, we have quite a few new formats, which I want to tell you about. I tell you about them because they'll be hotly watched, and I want to make sure there's no disappointment that you didn't make it to one of these. So the first one is something called GSF Live. GSF Live is the first ever TV chat show at a conference in the world. Think about that. The first ever TV. Now, tickets are on sale. There's a box office just out of here. Every day, there's tickets on sale. Show one into it today. Make sure that you go and get your tickets. And every single one of us, hopefully, should be interested in this. But there's limited capacity, but you'll only be able to attend one show. That's the first thing you should know. But please do queue up. The second is that we've created something called Stark Choices. It's a simulation about a utopian and a dystopian world. We want everyone to experience this. You have something like a 10-minute window to go through this experience where you'll get a better understanding of what the future may be. So please also look at that. The second is we have something, not Startup Alley, we call it Startup Souk, because we're in Dubai. Startup Souk is our attempt at actually bringing together edtech pioneers for you to meet, for you to speak with, for you to understand how technology is being used in all these different country systems and all this innovation that's happening. We have a competition running. I know you've heard about this other competition where we give $1 million, but this competition is called the Next Billion EdTech Prize. Now, Mr. Vaki, don't worry. It is not $1 billion you're going to give away. The Next Billion EdTech Prize is looking at how you impact the next billion learners, and especially in the emerging world. And that's why we've created this. You can have EdTech for the UK, for America, but what about the Sierra Leones of this world? What about the Indias? What about the Pakistans? What about Asia? EdTech must mean something to those populations where this youth bulge is coming. And that is why we're trying to curate a community and incentivize them to actually get going. We want success. We all know technology is part of the solution, but let's get on with it. Now, this platform has increasingly been used by other organizations and which we're really proud of. So you will see over the next 2 days, for example, the G7 presidency that Canada holds, and we have Plan Canada over here, have organized a briefing on girls' education, and the presidency is priority on that. We will hear of, and we will see, the G20 presidency held by Argentina, and Senator Esteban Bullrich is actually convening a meeting of stakeholders to look at how we put education firmly on that agenda. We have the Education Commission over here having a kickoff of their meeting and their work, their report. We have Club de Madrid, who we're commissioning a year-long study on the concept of education for shared societies. We also have something quite catchy. One of our alliances, so expert groups that we created last year, are actually launching a report called the Dubai Declaration on Climate Change. And I think all of these things are fantastic. This platform is for that purpose. And if you have anything you want to do in future years, please do approach us. None of this would be possible without the huge support that we receive from our sponsors. And hopefully we'll see our sponsors. Please. We can do better than that. Please thank our sponsors. In addition to our sponsors, we as a foundation believe in collaboration. We believe in partnership. So what we've done for the conference is have a set of organizational partners. Please also thank our organizational partners. Now, of course, you'll have seen the app because you've just downloaded it. Is that right? You just downloaded the app. On the app, you'll see some incredible names. You'll see some incredible names that will come into our conference. Now, I want to tell you how this happens. I want to tell you why there's such an interest in this conference. I want to ask everyone to take out your phones. Please take out your phones. I'm going to be patient. Please take out your phones. Turn the camera on. Or go to one of your social media platforms, point it at the stage. Yes, I do want to be famous. I want you to take a photo. Either that, doesn't really matter, take a photo. Now go to your social media account, whether it's Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Snapchat, LinkedIn. I want you to repeat this. Vikas says, my tag is at Vikas Pota, says this is the best education conference in the world, #GESF. This is not comedy, this is a request. That's because people see in the media, people see and hear, you go around the world and you talk to them and they've all heard of this event. But yet, where are the heads of government? Where are the political leaders? Education ministers, we love you, but we hope you make it to the head of your government. Now, speakers, Priyanka Chopra. I know. It's tough to compete, I get it. Charlize Theron, Sir Mo Farah, Lewis Hamilton. It's pretty big names, huh? You can applaud, it's fine. You can applaud. But the true applause I'm going to ask for each and every single one of you to give, and I'm going to right now ask the top 50 teachers in the world to stand and for you to applaud them. Please welcome the finalists of the Global Teacher Prize. A standing ovation for them, please. Rightly so. Wave. Thank you. So tomorrow we have our plenary again starts at 8:30. We have some special announcements to make. I want to encourage all of you to make sure that whilst tonight we have a beach party, I get that. Please enjoy yourselves, but please make sure you're here at 8:30. There's some very special announcements, very special speakers, and you should come. One that I'm very excited about is Vice President Al Gore from the US. Apart from being vice president of his country, Nobel laureate, the guy who's probably moved the needle the most when it comes to climate change in the world, he has recently written a book called The Future. That is what our conference is about. Please do make the effort to be here on time to listen to him and our other speakers and our other announcements. Last but not least, like I've said, I beg of you, please do follow us on social media. The handles are going to come up in a second. And it's really important to us that, one of the criticisms we have of just generally the education sector is that we're not good at communicating. This is your chance. This is your chance to actually leverage your social media platforms to tell everyone what you're hearing, what you're seeing, what you're learning, and please do so. Use our hashtags, use the platform to that benefit. I should also pre-warn you, we have almost 300 reporting journalists from around the world who have made the effort to come to GSF. They wear a badge which is purple. Everything is on the record when you speak to them, remember that. Especially all our experts. So, in the end, don't come to me and say you were quoted saying something which you weren't, because when you speak to a journalist, you just have to be sure that you are on the record. It's a great opportunity. We really love them coming, but we've got to make sure that we understand that you're on the record. So last but not least, our foundation over the last 8 years has been doing incredible work. You're seeing some of it. You're at a conference. We believe in convening. Convenings cost money. The Vaki family have very generously made sure that we do this in terms of they're committed to it. The Global Teacher Prize you will see more of later on. But actually, what we wanted to show you was our work in the countries from the programmatic field. So I'd like you to watch this small video. Given we have such a caliber of person here today, we wanted to take the opportunity to invite some of our prominent guests to come and speak to us about how they see the future and what they believe the state of the world is today. Please welcome actress Priyanka Chopra to the stage. May I ask Ms. Gillard to the stage, please. May I invite Matthew Prempe, His Excellency Matthew Prempe, Ghanaian Minister of Education, please. And may I, last but not least, invite Sunny Varki, the founder of our organization. Good luck. Please. Thank you all for agreeing to do this segment. I want to speak to each one of you regarding areas which I think make a huge difference, and your perspectives would help to provide an insight to the delegates who are here today. I want to start off with Ms. Chopra. You have worked with UNICEF very actively, and you were recently named a global ambassador for them. What is the cause that resonates most with you?
Well, I think first and foremost, good morning, everyone. Good morning to everybody here. Thank you so much for turning up in such abundance. This is an extremely important conversation that the world needs to have. I think the one thing that we're all here to discuss today, which is education, that's such a big cause that I am hugely attached to, not because I'm some prolific a person who wants to change the world, but I think it's such a simple, basic logic to the fact that education empowers people. Education, just the fact that you have the ability to take your future in your own hands is a basic human right that cannot be denied to any child around the world. I've been associated with UNICEF over a decade now, and I was recently in Jordan at a refugee camp for Syrian children. And I had the fortune to spend about 2 days with them, going through the camps, the Zatari camps, and a bunch of camps that UNICEF had set up for these kids to be able to have access to education. And the one thing that really stood out to me starkly was that these are children who are so vulnerable to influences from around the world. These are children who can immediately feel that the world has forgotten about me. Nobody cares about me. And instead of a pen in their hand, it's very easy for them to hold on to a rifle. Just like Muhammad said, to be influenced into taking charge of my life in some other way, because no one cares about my future. And that stood out to me so much. These children just wanted school books. They wanted to be able to go to school, become astronauts, become doctors, become engineers. And every child that I spoke to in that camp wanted to return back to Syria and rebuild it. And education is what gives them that. There's a whole generation of children. When we're talking about 2030, considering the world today, there's a whole generation of kids and a whole generation we might lose if they don't have that access. So that's the cause that's most important to me.
Thank you so much. It flows very nicely to what I want to ask Ms. Gillard. Ms. Gillard was the former Prime Minister of Australia and now is the current chair of the Global Partnership for Education. Ms. Gillard, the state of the world seems very fractured, to say the least.
To say the least.
And in terms of political leadership, what do we do to strengthen political leadership to make sure that these situations that Ms. Chopra speaks about are actually dealt with effectively?
Thanks for such an easy question. You did warn me you were going to ask me about the state of the world. Can I just start by saying thank you to Sunny, to the Varki family and to you for bringing us all together, and I'm delighted to be here again and to be in the UAE, the most recent donor to join the Global Partnership for Education. So terrific to be here. When we look at the world today, I think there are so many forces that are trying to get people to turn inwards. and to turn against others. You know, that's the tide of global politics, whether it's what we see coming from the US administration, whether we look at Brexit in the United Kingdom. There's a lot of messages that say it's all too hard, just turn inwards, look after your own and don't worry about the rest. And I think to engage the highest level political leadership in outreach, number one, we've got to reinforce community faith that change is possible. And whilst we come to conferences like this one and we get, you know, very intrigued by issues in education, I think it's really important the message we send as a collective is actually we can do this if we want to. We can educate every child in the world. It's not beyond us. Yes, there are always more things to learn and to know about, but if we as a global community said we're going to get this done, then we would. So to reinvest in community faith that change is possible, and then to bolster community demand for that change by explaining how interconnected we are today. In today's world, you might think you can kind of shield yourself away, but actually what's happening in a refugee camp in Jordan, whether a child in Sierra Leone picks up a pen or picks up a gun, ultimately that will end up manifesting in whether or not every individual lives in a stable and prosperous world or the alternative, a fractured world. So yes, we can do it, and yes, there's a reason why everybody should care about getting it done. And if we can get that community understanding bolstered, then that I think then supports the political leadership to move forward instead of selling some of the messages that we see so commonly sold by politicians today.
What do you do about political leadership that moves forward without its community or constituents?
Well, I mean, in democracies, you can only move forward so long without bringing people with you. Yes, we see some tremendous and brave acts of leadership, but ultimately, if you don't bring your community with you, then come the next election, there will be a backlash, there will be a change. So there has to be, you know, a dialogue here between political leaders who are showing courage and who are on the right track, communities that are demanding more and more change in a positive direction. You know, communities can sometimes drag politicians, politicians can sometimes drag communities, but it's not sustainable if one is over here and one is over there and they're not coming together around a shared agenda.
Why do you think, sorry, last question to you, but why do you think, both Mohammed said it, you said it, why do you think it is such a big deal that the UAE, that the fact that the UAE has contributed towards a GP replenishment of $100 million?
I think it's so important because it sends a message that this is truly being viewed by nations around the world as a shared global task. There are some fantastic long-term donors in global development and in the education area. The European Union, the United Kingdom, many of the Scandinavian and Nordic countries, you know, year after year have put in a lot of money. My own nation of Australia has historically put in a lot of money. But when you go back to them, they do say, well, we want to see a broadening of who's engaged in this agenda, and I think the UAE stepping forward in such a major way has really gladdened people's hearts that there is an understanding right around the world that we should be educating the world's children, that this is a shared endeavour, and I'm just so thankful to the UAE that they made that decision and announced it at our replenishment conference.
Thank you so much. Rightly so. Your Excellency, Dr. Prempeh, you are a recent education minister in Ghana, the person in the job that has to make the difference. You recently voted, if I'm not mistaken, the best minister in your government. And that's exactly what we need. We want the best teachers in classroom. We want the best people to be ministers of education. Sir, tell me, we work with you in Ghana on girls' education and on teachers' training. What is the secret sauce? How do we make sure that all girls are in school and learning?
We hope that if we understand what it means by education, you cannot leave anybody outside. And in my country, there are more girls than boys. So if you want to make an impact in education, you have to first see the relevance of girls' education in every sector of the society, not those girls-dominated sectors, but everywhere. So we have specific programs to bring girls from out of school back to the classroom and to stay in the classroom till they don't want any longer. But girls' education is so relevant because it leads to a shorter, what we call national education. We have education on the local level, on the individual level, the person, and the global level. And if you want to build a society that is sustainable, you really have to educate your girls. And this society that doesn't educate its women or ladies or girls is a society bound to fail. So we see the challenge that if we are to move forward as a country called Ghana, to play a relevant role in the global society, we first have to concentrate on our girl child.
Sir, I believe you have an announcement to make today. Please do share it with everyone.
Probably want to preempt me, but considering the fantastic work the Vaki Foundation is doing in Ghana, leveraging technology to help teacher education, student education, we think that what is missing in our country is about school leadership and management. And we want to partner with Vaki Foundation to bring your skills and your knowledge you have acquired elsewhere to help us improve learning outcomes through school leadership and school management.
Thank you so much, sir. A big round of applause. Mr. Vaki, you speak about education quite a lot. You're a very successful entrepreneur. You set up this foundation. I know what matters to you is the subject of inculcating good values in children. Mm-hmm. Do you want to speak a little bit more about that?
Yep, thank you, Vikas. First of all, I would like to welcome all of you all to coming to this conference. And of course, all the very important experts and VVIPs and stars like yourself, Priyanka and Julian, for coming to this conference and giving us your words of wisdom. I always have felt that schools are more than maths and science. As an educator, it's our duty to make sure that children are well educated. They go to the university of their choice and end up probably finding the job that they're passionate about. However, I think the world is in chaos, and I think children should be taught about the values, international values, where there is respect, there is sharing, caring, and to be a global citizen, to make sure that when they are successful, they are able to look after the underprivileged of the world.
You've also spoken a lot about technology.
I'm the wrong person, Vikas.
You're famous for not even sending emails. So True. Tell us about your views on technology.
Yeah.
I understand it, Mr. Vaki, I get it.
Yeah. Well, I'm actually, it's true that I don't even send an email. Not that it's difficult, but somehow I've just been not good at it, actually. But one thing I do hear that people say that robots are going to replace teachers and so on, and I personally feel that it's not going to happen because teachers explain, encourage, and inspire students, children want to do better and work harder for a good teacher. That being said, any technology that can help teachers to teach better would be highly welcome.
Fantastic. Robots will never replace teachers, he says.
God, I hope not.
Ms. Chopra, the final question to you. You have achieved a lot in India and in South Asia. You now live in the US and you have broken into the American film industry. Your story is one that of being a global citizen. Do you think we can ever teach children to be global citizens?
I think that's the need of the hour right now. I've traveled all over the world. I've had the amazing good fortune to work in many, many countries around the world, to meet a lot of people, to understand sort of cultures and sentiments, because I've worked with wonderful people. But I think what has happened around the globe, and this is not just South Asia, India, America, we are still bound by borders and geography. We're still bound by race and language. We are still bound by seeing our differences instead of applauding and understanding that eventually we're a human race. And we've forgotten our humanity. So I think being a global citizen is exactly that it doesn't matter where a child comes from. It doesn't matter whether he or she is from Sierra Leone, the UAE, India, America. Each child needs to have the right to be able to bring this world to a place which thinks about humanity over whose God is better, or which country is better, or a division. I think, so being a global citizen and being a global community is important, but I think children are not there yet because we haven't been able to inculcate those values that you talk about, sir, into saying that there's not a difference. Our differences is what makes us unique, but coming together is what will make the world so much better than reading the newspapers as we do this, like these days, and waking up every day to something that all of us are being desensitized to now.
Your comments made me smile because I see Professor Fernando Remus standing over there. Please stand up, sir. He has written a book on global citizenship that every teacher should learn and read. Ms. Chopra, final question.
Right.
I promise you. Donald Trump.
Right. I'm so glad this question's come to me.
Living in America today, you're the only person who lives in America today from this panel, so you're qualified to comment on this. You see a lot of people who come out against him, and you see all the things that he tweets about. As an American, what do you feel?
As an American?
As an Indian who lives in America.
As an Indian
who lives in America
on a work visa. Let's remember that.
So I think you may have answered it, but what is your message? Ma'am, you see in the film industry in particular, and you see society, the hashtag MeToo movement and whatever it is. What are the lessons we should take out of this? And I think we'll conclude this panel on that question.
I think I answered your question on Trump for sure, but I think that, when it comes to what has happened with the internet and the fact that people have suddenly, it's such an incredible time to be a global citizen right now because people, no matter where in the world they are, can have a conversation and are empowered to be able to bring their thoughts together. Women have support from other women, which is such a shocking revelation, which doesn't really happen because women are always pitted against each other. Today, somebody can have an opinion, like if you see the protests that happened, that children did in the United States yesterday against gun control. This is empowerment. This is a generation of people that are coming out and saying, I am not going to stand for it anymore. Hashtag time's up on every level. So I do think I see hope. I see hope for this generation. I see all of us. Thank you. I see all of us coming here, sitting here together, heads of states, educators, talent, artists, coming together with the same agenda that 2030, by then, hopefully, should be a different world for the generation that we're living in today. Kids should not be subjected to the things that they are. They should be given books. They should be imagining their future. They should not have to worry about being shot in a classroom. And that goes for something that's around the world. So I see hope. I see all of us coming here together to bring hope to this exact thing that we're all trying to do, which is make the world a better place, and through education.
On that note, please thank our panel. Please. Cheers. Watch your step.
I'm glad I didn't have to explain.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome His Excellency Tariq Al Ghurg, CEO of Dubai Cares, with a message from our host country.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, a very good morning to you all, and welcome to Dubai and the UAE, and I hope you're enjoying your stay so far. It is great pleasure to be here in the presence of so many global education champions and visionary leaders to discuss how we prepare young people for the world of 2030 and beyond. As I was thinking about what to say today with regards to what the world might look like in 12 years and how to prepare our youth for it, it occurred to me to think back to 12 years ago and whether there is anything I would have done differently knowing what I know about the world today. Well, for starters, had I known what I know today, I would have bought stocks in Apple. I mean, who could have predicted how the iPhone and smartphones in general would completely change the way we interact with our surroundings? Who could have predicted 12 years ago that we would one day be getting most of our information from social media rather than traditional news outlets? I look at my 3 daughters today, the eldest being 10 years old, and realize that a legitimate career option for their generation is something called a social media influencer, where one can make living by simply having an active and presumably interesting presence on social media. It is safe to say that things have certainly changed since my youth. So how can I then prepare my daughters for the world of 2030 and beyond? At the onset, the future for them looks bright. War and violence are at historical lows and still declining. Advances in science and technology will help us live much longer and have brought us closer towards ending disease and hunger. We have never lived in such an environment-rich world. We literally have the sum of all human knowledge available at our fingertips, just one Google away. Nonetheless, as innovation accelerates, it doesn't automatically benefit everyone. The inequality in the distribution of this technological advancement, along with the opportunities and knowledge attainment that follow, is likely to widen the gap between those who have and those who don't. And the gap is already wide. A simple case in point is the lack of equitable access to quality education around the world. Forget about innovation. Today, 330 million children in developing countries who are actually in school are failing to learn. Only half of adults aged 20 to 64 in 36 developing countries who have completed 5 years of school can read a single sentence. One single sentence. How will all this information that all of us here in this room have right at our fingertips ever serve them? We know what some of those reasons are. A lack of qualified teachers is one major issue. Not only are there not enough teachers globally to achieve universal primary education, let alone secondary, but many of the teachers that are currently working are also untrained, leading to children failing to learn the basics, such as maths and reading. Globally, the UN estimates that 69 million new teachers are required to achieve universal primary and secondary education by 2030. Gender is another big reason why children are denied access to education. Despite recent advances in girls' education, a generation of young women has already been left behind. At least 1 in 5 adolescent girls around the world today is denied an education by the daily realities of poverty, conflict, and discrimination. Poverty forces many families to choose which of their children to send to school. Girls are still one of the ones who more often miss out due to a belief that there's less value in educating a girl than a boy, even if we know that children with educated mothers are more likely to be vaccinated and less likely to be stunted because of malnourishment. What about children with disabilities? Despite the fact that education is a universal human right, being denied access to school is common for the world's 93 million children with disabilities. In some of the world's poorest countries, up to 95% children with disabilities are out of school. During my recent visit to Uganda, where Dubai Cares supports an inclusive education program targeting children with disabilities, I learned that only 6% of children with disabilities completes primary education. Earlier, I said that war and violence today are at historical lows. And while that may well be the case, in 2017 alone, around 50 million children were living in countries affected by conflict, with 27 million of them out of school. I just came back from Colombia earlier this week, where a 5-decade-long civil war has resulted in the most prolonged and serious humanitarian crisis in the Americas, with children and young people bearing the brunt of this conflict. So where does this all leave us? Well, the cost of ignoring or ineffectively acting on this inequity of access to quality education is extreme. If we do nothing now, half of the world's children and youth will be out of school or failing to learn by end of 2030. Is that the future we want to prepare them for? I think we all know the answer to that. However, this inequity is not inevitable. We all have to work to narrow that gap. And as the UAE marks the year of Zayed in 2018, please allow me to stress upon a quote from our nation's founding father, the late Sheikh Zayed, who once said, quote, "The real asset of any advanced nation is its people, especially the educated ones. And the prosperity and success of the people are measured by the standard of their education." Unquote. Education has the power to turn the course of human development from poverty to improved living standards for all, and is the only means that we have with which we can bridge the technology divide and democratize innovation acceleration and avoid the pitfalls of our lack of action so we can make it part of everyone's future, not just ours. Thank you very much.
Please, a round of applause for Tariq Al-Gurg.
A quick notice for everyone. The breakouts after this will only start after this plenary finishes. So we are running a little bit late, but that's okay. The breakouts will only start out after the plenary finishes. When we were devising the theme, it was quite easy to say, to think and say that actually the person or the kind of person that we want to deliver the keynote at our opening plenary is someone who comes from the tech world. This is about the future after all, 2030. Well, we've gone a little bit different. And I'm personally very excited today to introduce Professor Simon Sharma to be our keynote speaker. Professor Sharma is a historian, a television presenter, a critic, and an author. He's the man for who millions of people, for millions of people has brought the history of the world into their living rooms, from Greece to Rome, from Babylon to Baghdad. I can think of no one better to help us understand the new world through explaining the old world we have come from. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Professor Simon Sharma.
Good morning to all of you, and thank you, Mr. Varkey, and the great benefactors of the Varkey Foundation who make this essential moment possible. Good morning to excellencies, and above all to all of you there who belong to the noblest profession in the world. Forget bankers, educators, teachers. You will save the world. You will save the world. There is nothing more important to the future of 2030 than those who are trying to do something to arrest the degradation of the planetary habitat, stop the slow death of our planet, except those who are wrestling with the other great scourge of our times, inequality of access to education. This goes as much for relatively advanced societies like the United States, where I live, where inequality of education is the great toxic force that is tearing the country apart. It was extraordinary to me, and I'm sure we will, whether we like it or not, hear his name now and again in the proceedings that follow over the next few days. Extraordinary to me, not just that Donald Trump, during his campaign, could say with that smirk on his face, boy, we love the poorly educated, but he could have a round of laughing applause which follow it. None of us here want to see or embrace the notion that the poorly educated is any kind of message to give to our children or to the future. Now, Vikas, good luck. You did a good job in trying to explain what I'm doing here. Nonetheless, I'm honored but completely baffled in the nicest possible way why all of you who are interested in the next few days on how to prepare our children for 2030 should want an historian, and an elderly historian at that, to explain to you why I do actually think that the challenge of using the wisdom of the past to create a prospering future is a good idea, in fact, an indispensable idea for the future. But I have someone else who I want to summon from the dead to explain why that might be true. And that person is the writer George Orwell. One of the great themes of his cautionary masterpiece, 1984, it may be, in fact, the great theme of that still extraordinarily powerful book, is the control of memory. That, according to Orwell, painfully aware of the totalitarian erasures of the past in Stalin's Soviet Union, is where power truly lies. While he's enduring a rather grim period of punishing calisthenics for the sake of party vigor and solidarity, Winston Smith, the doomed hero of the book, reflects painfully that the past had not merely been altered, it had actually been destroyed. For how could you establish even the most obvious fact when there existed no record outside your memory? For the party, the condition of obedience and loyalty is the liquidation of the past and many of its records which might survive independent of its manipulative and monopolizing scrutiny. For the party, those who seek to control power know that history always and habitually speaks plurally, that its defining form of discourse is debate, is the challenge of opinion. Throughout the book, 1984, any old thing that somehow survived memory cleansing, old speak, old literature, the song Oranges and Lemons that Winston hears someone sing as they hang out the washing, a glass ornament, anything somehow carrying the trace marks of time or inheritance is by virtue of that dangerously suspect. In the terrifying climax of the book, set in the notorious Room 101 of the Ministry of Love, which is the name given, of course, to the House of Torture, Winston is reminded by his demonic interrogator, O'Brien, of one of the party's paramount slogans. "Repeat it, if you please," O'Brien orders his prisoner. Winston dutifully recites back, "Who controls the past controls the future. Who controls the present controls the past." O'Brien then demands to know if Winston believes there is an actual past embodied in anything that might not have been put in his head. Where does the past exist, if at all? Winston says, in records. It is written down in the mind, in human memories. Very well then, says O'Brien, the party controls records and we control all memories. Thus we control the past and the present, do we not? But how can you stop people remembering things, cries Winston again, momentarily forgetting the dial which is going to increase the voltage of his torture. It's involuntary, this remembering. It is outside oneself. How can you control memory? You have not controlled mine, he cries in a last moment of desperation before the dial is turned up and the pain enhanced. Orwell writes, O'Brien's manner grew stern again. He laid his hand on the dial. So I want to talk a bit about the past in our forum on the future. They are not disconnected. There's nothing more meaningless than the present, which did not exist 5 minutes ago. In Orwell's view, and in my mind, the past and its critical study, history, is not disposable in any kind of prospering, free human future, which is to say, a future which breathes the oxygen of argument and dissent. In my view, the only future worth having. So history, which now takes on as many forms that it has costumes, Games of Thrones, fantasy, Downton Abbey, period romance, the hip-hop performances of Hamilton, which actually has brought history to extraordinary numbers of young people in America for the first time in any sense of real excitement and grip. And at the other pole, of course, history with the proper severity of academic scholarship. History in all these forms is not an ornamental option for the future, period color, the satisfaction of antique curiosity akin to lumber room rummaging. It's rather the lifeboat of freedom, of liberty. If the success of educating our children for the future is to be measured purely functionally, quantitatively, technologically, as primers for the dawning age of robotics and AI, you may well conclude that history is surplus to requirement, at least not top of your agenda. It will not generate populations of software engineers. It will not much help with the amassing of big data or the taste cohorts of consumers designed according to the promptings of that data. But that does not make history and the humanities, their sisters, redundant. Just the opposite, in fact. With machines taking over physical production, short and long distance transport, performing massively in the service industry, it is in fact the creative side of things which will remain irreducibly human. I think of Stephen Hawking as reverently as all the rest of us do. And historians in particular were reassured many years ago, I think in the early 1990s, when Hawking proclaimed something rather wonderful called the chronological projection conjecture, when he was imagining time, in which he said that one of the few things of which he was actually certain was that however squishy time became, time travel would never actually happen, which has made the world safe for historians, thank God, in a self-interesting moment. In 2030, even at the exponentially accelerating rates of technological change, the coming of artificial intelligence and a robotically engineered, algorithmically shaped society, there are certain things that world will not be supplying. The free play of critical argument, which is not the same as counter moves in chess strategies, the burn of creative imagination, instinctive rather than logical inventiveness, especially the instinct which connects seemingly unconnected phenomena, what the poet T.S. Eliot called, describing the metaphysical imagery and conceits in a poem by John Donne, specifically the wonderful line where a cadaver is being described as carrying a bright bracelet of hair about the bone. Eliot called that the yoking together of heterogeneous things, from which comes the great reservoir of imaginative power, the salvation and future, I think, of human destiny, the thing which will as truly take us forward as any purely mechanical or technological invention. Long-distance memory, the capacity to stand back and look at what humans have wrought, the understanding of what might have happened as well as what did happen, is at the root of history's liberation from determinism. It's not consolatory, it's not decorative, but it's challenging as Orwell made it seem to those who would want to disable free thought. Now, I'm not claiming that anything resembling the dystopian tyranny described in 1984 is about to seize power over the records of the past, though, of course, this certainly has happened, and not so very long ago, and it still happens in places where the imprisonment of memory is the condition of totalizing power. North Korea, perhaps, even in some places where theocracy monopolizes power, in this particular region, no doubt. It's also possible to damage history's vital contentiousness in ways which are less obviously brutal than the patrols of thought police, but which still disable its critical energy. One of those strategies I've already alluded to is the glamorization of ignorance, the promotion of gut feeling over the accumulation of knowledge and thought. Ignorance is strength, as another of Orwell's party slogans had it. Or conversely, the assumption, and it's extraordinary how quickly this has spread. We're going to be talking a bit about this, I think, on the debate on populism. The notion that science and empirically acquired knowledge is merely the stock in trade of an elite of chattering classes, not just intellectuals, but teachers and students, and that the obsession with empirically acquired evidence somehow has the smell of disloyalty about it, is suspect, is cut off from the ordinary instincts of the people. Those ordinary instincts are said to be populist. Patriotic solidarity, on the other hand, in that view, comes from revelation. Revelation, something unanswerable to reason, from the subordination of reason to crowd certainties expressed viscerally and physically. One example, again, very much on the minds of us all living in the United States. Constitutional liberties, the rights and obligations of citizenship, deeply pondered by the Founding Fathers, by Hamilton and Madison in the Federalist Papers, boils down, constitutional freedom now, boils down to the right to own a gun, to firearms. The text of the Second Amendment to the American Constitution begins with the important phrase, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the survival of an independent America. Then the right of citizens to bear arms shall not be abridged. On any historical scrutiny, any historian would tell you about what was in the minds of the people who provided the Second Amendment. It was, of course, resistance to professional, sometimes mercenary, standing armies. That was how the American Revolution had started. But this can be subordinated when you forget history, when you lose history, to a non- or anti-historical reading, and that turns the Second Amendment into something which endorses the protection of any individual's right to collect an immense personal arsenal. In that kind of face-off, statements of gut feeling, of faith, very often prevail over historical knowledge. And the body of citizens is the poorer for it. History is, above all, reflective. That's both its deep source of moral power, but sometimes, through its rhetorical modesty, its vulnerability to being shouted out by visceral histrionics, the howls and chants of punitive theater, lock her up. Donald Trump's election campaign of 2016 was the first since the fall of fascism to understand and deploy this political potential of demonization, the glee of hatred, and its empowering adrenaline rush. Two things then happened: the debasement of political argument to roughhouse entertainment and the barely concealed invitation to argue physically, the landing of a sucker punch rather than a clinching of debate. And I don't see, actually, I wish I could feel differently, any reason why those tactics, so successful 2 years ago, won't be repeated in the next presidential election campaign. I deeply hope not. History is the enemy of the tribal yell, the command to value solidarity over skepticism. Let me remind you how it all began, at least in the Western European tradition. In the first instance, as in the opening lines of Herodotus's great histories, it was designed to perpetuate memory beyond the lives of direct witnesses, in that case, of the wars between the Greeks and the Persians. But that exercise in creating a narrative, a story that endured, in Herodotus' case, rested on a very expansive and eclectic use of sources, what he had heard as well as what he had read, and not just, as speaks to Julia Gillard's point, not just about his own culture. Though Herodotus' own culture was not narrowly Athenian. He came from the much more heterogeneous world of the Ionian Islands. That was the particular kind of Greek he spoke. What anyone who's read Herodotus is immediately struck by is the omnivorous curiosity of this approach, its outward-facing nature, its refusal to treat history as collective self-confirmation. Herodotus is eager to know the enemy, not just as caricature, but ethnographically, a curiosity that extended to other cultures beyond the Greek world, most memorably, of course, to Egypt as well as Persia. And this appetite for reports, far and wide, reliable and unreliable, you're getting my message about how vital this story brought to us from more than 2 millennia ago is for your own headline of global education and skills. This appetite for reports seems to me at the heart of what defines history itself, taught by all good history teachers in a school classroom or at college. It's its default setting. The default setting of history is pluralism. Is pluralism, dear friends, making space to understand cultures that are not like us. A reach through space and time to someone else, the effort of empathy, and I use the word carefully in its proper sense of delivering to our children the ability to put themselves in someone else's shoes. History is something other than self-vindication, self-congratulation. History is the challenge to uniformity, to monocultural certainty. And then there, of course, is this another Greek, the second father figure, very much an Athenian, Thucydides, a protagonist in the history. He was a fired general of the Peloponnesian Wars that he's writing about, and I suppose as a result with an axe to grind. But alienated or not, what counts about Thucydides' masterpiece, again, is its rejection of triumphalism. Insofar as it's a book which explores the morality or amorality of democratic imperialism, its temper is cautionary and in the end profoundly tragic. The old canard about history only being written by the victors could not be less true in this rather crucial defining case. Its ethical power and its narrative spell exist precisely in the unflinching depiction of a catastrophic defeat born from overreach. The Athenian expedition to Sicily that was a hubristic comeuppance for that particular gesture of overreach, the fulfillment of warnings set out by the wise general old Nicias, yet overruled by the foolhardy adventurism of his rhetorical adversary, Alcibiades, the impulsively vain, headstrong flag waver for action at all costs, who mocks veteran wisdom, the wisdom of the past, as patriotic weakness and leads Athens into calamity. The whole honor of history at this founding moment is its resistance to vaingloriousness, its commitment to honesty, its aversion to cultural sedative, its supreme value on the recollection of truth. History is not meant to lull you to sleep. It's meant to give you insomnia. When you practice history, you abandon cheerleading. You assume the honorable vocation of gadflies to the complacent and the powerful. You become a necessary inconvenience, necessary for the preservation of freedom. All of which is not to condescend to the blandishments of the past. If entertainment without thought is spineless, thought without entertainment is heartless. And the greatest historians, including those two Greeks I've been talking about, knew all about narrative grip, the importance of storytelling, its kinship to drama, its performative theatrical self-consciousness. And that's what all of the great history teachers here know this. First comes the story, but then must come the question. Without all those qualities, history retreats into a scholastic compound and becomes simply the monopoly of the academy. But half a century ago, my old mentor, my professor, who himself in his own career reconciled popular with scholarly writing, always used to say, remember you belong to an ancient craft which began with Herodotus shouting in the Agora. These two halves of the personality of history should happen and do happen in every great classroom, the narrative and the analytical, and they're always inseparable. However simply described, those tasks, both of telling the story and posing the question, so that questions about our lives now, where we came from, where we are going to, arise out of the communication of those stories. And of course, the technology we've all been celebrating and will be celebrating, what does it do better than almost anything else is to generate the beautiful grip of stories. They are so urgent. They have been perennially urgent, but never more so, I think, than now, when the whole standing of truth-based history is in question, when Holocaust denial has become almost culturally epidemic, not least on the web, which, much as we fondly imagine would be a transparent form of truth, turns out to be a perfect breeding ground for myths, lies, and conspiracies, all of which can be reinforced by communities of the credulous. Whether we like it or not, history has become a front in our culture wars, burning up the world from one end to the other. where one stands, say, on Brexit or the fate of the American Republic, on the future of Germany, the future of Israel and Palestine, of this entire region, all turn on debates and how and why our different communities came into being. The place of immigration in the construction of American national identity, for instance, that is essential to political decision-making in free societies right now. Now, it's always possible for historians to pull a blanket over our heads and hurry to the next department meeting. But the truth is that all history today is public history. History is not for the faint-hearted, but there's no getting away from it, particularly if you live in America, as I do, because of everything pretty much every day, every week, is said anti-historically. One, again, example, not to bore you with too much American current affairs, but just the other week, and this is something of global concern outside the realm of history, against all traditional Republican economic orthodoxy, President Trump airily declaring trade wars easy to win, as you all know, imposed punitive tariffs on imported steel and aluminium, the consequences of which could be potentially exceptionally damaging to global economic stability. Against the impetuousness of that decision, any historian with a passing knowledge of the 1930s would have shouted or lectured these strange words: "Smoot Hawley," the protectionist measure signed by President Hoover in 1930, which, if it did not actually trigger the Depression, which I think it did not, absolutely made it deeper and more irreversible. The trade war that moment triggered also began with selective measures, in that case aimed at ostensibly agricultural produce. Now, I don't mean to say that governments the world over, living in the narrow time band of immediate exigency, should have some in-house historian to warn against such folly, although I am available, everybody. The current White House is unlikely to entertain unwelcome news from the past. Only historians, I think, in the business of ego massage and national self-celebration need apply. But beyond these short-term tragic comedies of policy, the reason why history needs to be cherished and encouraged for the world of 2030 and beyond, it is because our job description is to take that long view of humanity's predicaments and possibilities. Whatever the immediate future holds, you don't have to be Thucydides or H.G. Wells to know that there are particular great matters of global concern which are not going away, and which could be the wisdom to treat those issues could be immensely, almost inexhaustibly enriched by historical understanding. The first is the ongoing degradation of planet Earth, which, precisely because it's largely the result of human agency, is as much an historical as a scientific issue. The vast majority of historical writing, of course, presupposes human records, documents, the marks of social activity. But over the past century, environmental histories have used all kinds of ecological evidence to write accounts of events every bit as thrilling and worrying and exciting and pressing as the Peloponnesian Wars. The very best of them have been extraordinary tour de force of narrative writing. I think of Donald Worcester's great and terrifying book, The Dust Bowl, an astonishing chronicle of spectacular ecological collapse in the 1920s and 30s, every bit as important as The Grapes of Wrath for understanding the human condition in the midst of a spiraling ecological terror. Or Paul Horgan's extraordinary history of the Rio Grande, great river, another literary as well as historical masterpiece of shared experience, which could hardly be more resonant in the age of the Great Wall of Trump. Or histories of fire written by Stephen Pine, who actually, in another great book of his called The Ice, showed that even an ostensibly uninhabited continent like Antarctica did in fact have a human and cultural history. And if you think that the relationship of human society to fire ecologies is marginal to the great themes of history and indeed to the habitable future. Try asking Californians, for example, about that. These great environmental histories can actually have their versions in the schoolroom. They can have versions on the web. We can communicate those to children as well as students in college. Environmental history shapes the history of other great crises of our age and the immediate future. The gulf between rich and poor, the seedbeds of violence, the great tidal waves of displacement and migration, which for all the impedimenta of walls, borders, fences, even geographical barriers, are going to wash over the developed world. For example, a history of the river basins of some of the more embattled areas of this region of the Middle East, the Upper Jordan Valley and the Upper Euphrates watershed, reveals the fact that the degradation of that particular ecosystem in northern Israel, in Syria, in northern Jordan, made an ancient, extensive kind of farming ultimately unsustainable through a prolonged drought and all through the deliberately diverted runoff of the upper reaches of those river basins over many years and many decades. The result made the migration of young adults, mostly men, absolutely necessary, out in particular the Syrian countryside and into towns where there was no work for them. The same sort of thing alluded to by Mohammed and by other speakers on the panel, until the mutually hostile forces of government, military, and the militias came along. The gun came along rather than the pen and the book. Ecology, economy, demography, migration, and violence, the horror we're still living with 7 years on in Syria, are all part of an interconnected chain. And what's needed here, as in many other places around the world, is exactly the kind of historical narrative that tells this story and asks those hard questions. History as action, as well as history as reflection. Oddly enough, this was actually the kind of history I grew up with as a young student in the 1960s, the kind known from the journal in which it was published as Annales, Économie, Société, Civilisation. Its father figure, though not its founder, was the great Fernand Braudel, whose work on the Mediterranean basin in the 16th century was our generation's methodological Bible. It began simply with geographical vision, the great expanse of the sea itself, and then, as if airborne, moved slowly, but with a great kind of geophysical lyric style, onto the promontories, archipelagos, and peninsulas, and then to ships slowly making their way windborne to ports and harbors, including ships making their way to harbors like this ancient one. We think of Dubai as having, as a friend of mine said, no history for 1966. Nothing could be less true, of course, the hub of an ancient trading route between Horn of Africa, the Persian Gulf, and India. It was all mesmerizingly beautiful, this kind of history, and it is perfect for television. It's perfect for audio-visual educational communication. It was thick with thought, as well as a kind of scientific poesy. It made our generation of historians geographers too. It gave us a sense that to be an historian was to be somehow a global historian. And I think this exhilarated insight, however, came with a sovereign dogma, at least under Braudel's guidance, that these great vistas and their slow shifts were the true history, and events and beliefs and utterances of humans which had dominated history beforehand were, in his extraordinary phrase, just the foam atop the great rolling waves. And this, at some point, seemed to me, and again my generation, just untrue. That was the problem. You couldn't actually describe, for example, the Russian Revolution or the French Revolution unless you listened to what Braudel dismissed as the foam on top of the waves, utterances, rhetoric, ideology, philosophy. The history of the world, the history we want our children to understand, both before and after 2030, must be Olympian in that grand anal globalist styles and engage with these deep environmental issues, the parameters within which human history unfolds. But it does need to integrate into its storytelling what happens to those deep matters when they become the stuff of spoken, enacted politics. Put another way, the story of what happens here in 2030 when the oil runs a little dry will be inescapably, indivisibly, at the same time, ecological, cultural, and political. And how to tell that story ahead, how to teach it, how to deliver it. The reports of the death of the physical book, I'm very happy to say as a writer, have been exaggerated. I don't think effective history in the visionary way I've tried to delineate it, something connects the ancient Greeks with our school, with our graduates of 230, can just afford to stay within printed pages. The collapse of broadcast monopolies, their digital splintering into a myriad of communication platforms, of video, audio, even augmented and virtual realities, as well as the potential, at the moment, even chaotic potential of the web, does indeed offer countless creative ways to bring past and future together. This might seem like pedagogic heresy, but in fact, I think embracing it will absolutely be a necessity, and it can happen without, I believe, any gross adulteration of the complexity of questions or the spellbinding grip of story. It's a commonplace we're going through the next fourth technological revolution. There'll be as many and as fierce battles, both over content and delivery, as anything that George Orwell had imagined. To think of history as there at the heart of those battles, in the cockpit, might seem improbable, like parchment landing in Silicon Valley. But while history's cast of characters are the dead, its creative energies, as long as we believe not just in the efficacy, but the free creative spirit of our children, are vitally alive. As much as technology or biology, it's the understanding of the past, which I deeply believe to be a vital enabler of a humane future. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor.
911, what is your emergency?
Yes, there's shots at Stillman Douglas. Somebody's shooting up the school at Stillman Douglas.
I love you. It's going to be fine. Can you hide somewhere? Can you play dead?
As you can imagine, it is a challenging, difficult morning where another community is in disbelief, shocked by devastating violence, this time at that Florida high school on Valentine's Day.
For more on the outcry that has grown out of last week's violence, we turn to two students from the Florida high school where the attack occurred. Susanna Barna is a 17-year-old senior who writes for the school newspaper. Louis Mizzen is also 17 and a senior.
I think that this is our home, this is our high school, and this happened here, and we're going back to school in a week or so, and we have to walk the hallways where this has happened.
Specifically, what we would like to see is just some sort of policy change. So an example would be to change the age to purchase a gun to 21 for all types of guns, opposed to just handguns, which it is now.
We're joined now by Kevin Trejos, a senior at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School.
We just want everyone to know that we need to have change in this country to really make sure that school shootings like the one that just happened never happen to anyone else again.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Trustee of the Varkey Foundation, Ms. Vijita Patel. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Trustee of the Varkey Foundation, Ms. Vijita Patel.
Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, in 1999, two teenagers went on a shooting spree in Columbine High School in Colorado, killing 12 students, one teacher, and wounding 20 others. It was the worst school shooting in American history at that time, and a national debate started around the priority and issues with gun violence. In December 1994, a young person went through a similar situation and shot 20 young children aged only 6 and 7 years old, and also shot 6 adults in Sandy Hook Elementary School in Connecticut. Another debate started. The issue of school safety was discussed. A president was even left in tears, but still no change. Last month, a teenager shot at his school community with an assault rifle. That was in Parkland, Florida, at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School. 17 lives were lost, just as many injured. But in the darkest hour, there is light. That light is young people, students standing together, finding their voices, demanding change. And their voices have clarity, dignity, and conviction. After that shocking event, a wave of demonstrations took place across dozens of high schools in America. This time, the students were demanding the change, and they were taking the issue as their own. They walked out of their classrooms to protest gun violence. Last week marked 1 month since the Parkland tragedy. Through social media, 3,000 schools across America saw students walk out of their classrooms with unity and a mission to challenge this issue and to raise a lens on gun violence and school safety. On 24th of March, exactly 1 week from today, almost 500,000 people will descend on Washington, D.C., coming together and united in a mission to protest gun violence. There is a very powerful and raw power about this movement. And most fundamental is that it is led by the students. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, 3 students from Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School have flown all the way from Florida to join us here at the forum. They have experienced immeasurable trauma and loss. But what you're going to meet are 3 individuals who have strength, who are brave, who are courageous, and very clear on making a change. They are inspirational agents of change. They're passionate about making this change and owning their future. Please stand up and give a very warm GESF welcome to Louis Mizzen, Susanna Barra, and Kevin Trejos. I speak on behalf of everybody at the forum. We are so privileged to have you join us. You have spoken so passionately in the media about quite traumatic experiences and the way that you want to make sure the future is yours and you are owning that change. Can we start with you, Kevin, possibly sharing with us the experiences from that day on the 14th of February?
Yeah, so, well, the day began a fairly normal day. We had a fire alarm drill in the morning during second period. And then later during fourth period, at the end of the day, about 20 minutes before school ended, we heard the fire alarm again, which it was unusual, but it could be due to a number of circumstances. As we walked out of our class to go to our designated spot, we started hearing screams saying, "Code red, get in the classroom right now, go, go, go." And at first, I don't think it processed for me. I didn't realize that Code Red meant that there was an active shooter on campus. So at that point, I was rushed into a classroom, which was not my classroom, and put inside the supplies closet. It was at that point that I realized that most of my classmates weren't in the same closet with me. They had gone up to their classroom, the classroom that actually all of us were in at the time. And it was scary because I didn't know what was going to happen. I didn't realize that we were now separated and wouldn't be able to talk to each other for the next 2 hours. Being in that closet was scary. We didn't know what was going on initially. One of the teachers in there had a radio where she was getting messages from all over the school saying there was an active shooter, but she quickly turned it off because she didn't want us to hear it. And a lot of people honestly thought it was a drill. They said, "Oh, well, we are going to have an active shooter drill in the future anyways. Maybe that's what we're doing right now." And then about 20 minutes after, hearing all sorts of rumors through group messaging and through social media, we got our first official confirmation from the local police department that there was an active shooter situation at our school. I don't think we realized the gravity of what was happening at that time. We were busy trying to keep each other together. We were trying to make sure that those who were, crying, afraid, were feeling better. We were all trying to console each other as we were there. And it was scary. There was people crying. We didn't know where the shooter was. We didn't know if he was coming to our classroom next. So it wasn't until 20 minutes after, when I got that first confirmation, that I texted my parents. I didn't want to text them before. I was too scared. I didn't want them to be fearing for my life while I was at school and they were at work. So once I got the confirmation, I said, well, I can't let them find out on the news. They have to find out from me. And I sent them a message. I said, hi, Mom and Dad, I'm at school. There's an active shooter on campus. I'm safe. I don't know if I didn't know if I was safe at that point, but I wanted them to feel that I was. Then we were in that closet for another hour and a half, 2 hours, not knowing much. At one point, I went on my phone and went onto Facebook Live, and I saw helicopter footage right above us as we were in school, and they were filming what was happening and giving some information. So we heard 2 injured, 5 injured, and then eventually 20 injured. It was devastating. There was nothing we could do. We weren't in the building where it happened. We were nearby, but and then afterwards we started hearing rumors of who was shot, who wasn't, and a lot of familiar names started coming up. Some of my friends, and I just didn't know what to think at that point, because literally an hour before I was talking to them. We were making jokes together. We were reading our sonnets in AP Literature. It was tough, but at the point I didn't realize what was going on. I didn't realize that this is serious. This is going to be the biggest mass shooting at a high school in the United States in history. About 2 hours later, we started getting notifications that from every major news source, and then we were told that the police were going to come into our room. But we were scared. We didn't know where the shooter was. They said he was still at large. We were like, okay, well, he could be right outside our classroom right now. We don't know. And then we started hearing rumors that there might be 2 shooters, there might be 3 shooters. And when we got out, we didn't know if they had captured anyone yet. These police officers came into our room with huge military-style guns. Like, it was like the military had come in and they're wearing full bulletproof vests and everything. But I don't want to say we felt safe with them, because we didn't know anything that was going on outside of our classroom. But I was glad to see that we had at least some support. At that point, we ran out of our classroom. We were told, initially we were walking because we didn't know what was going on, and then we were told, run, run, run. At that point, I was so scared, because I was like, oh my God, why are we being told to run all of a sudden? But I guess it was just standard protocol. As I walked out into the clearing, I saw hundreds of police officers, the FBI, the SWAT team, everyone with huge guns ready to attack any potential suspect. At that point, I looked to one of my friends who was in the closet with me, and I was like, wow, this is bad. This is really bad. I didn't get to see my parents for another 2 hours after I left the school, because the traffic was insane in our little town of Parkland. And there was news everywhere. Our teachers were on the phone, getting phone calls from all the major news networks. And we didn't know at that point, because there was rumors, oh, this person got shot, that person got shot, that person, I haven't heard from them. And everyone was trying to spread as much information as they could through social media, saying, have you seen this person? Maybe their phone ran out of battery and that's why they're not answering. But last night I actually looked back through some of the messages that I got on the day, and it's insane how much we knew, yet how much we didn't know. Because a lot of the rumors ended up being true, and it was devastating.
Kevin, thank you so much for sharing that with us. Susanna, could you share with us what it felt like inside and outside of school following the attack?
Well, inside and out of school, our community has been stronger than ever, more united than ever. The day after the shooting at a local park, we actually had 2 vigil services, one in the afternoon for teachers and students to kind of reunite and mourn together, because they were all the first-hand people who were there that day. And then at night we had a candlelight service at 6:30 for anyone in the community to come and pay their respects to the victims and just grieve all together. We were out of school for about 2 weeks because of the shooting, and then the first day we went back was probably one of the hardest days. You'd walk into class, and you see 2 empty desks, one of the victims and one of a friend who was severely injured. And in both cases, it's heartbreaking, because it's really hard to acknowledge the reality of what happened to us. And it became so obvious when you go back into class, you're trying to get back to a sense of normalcy, and you have to look at that every day. Besides that, inside and out of school, friends and family, we've all been there for each other. We've been helping the people who need it more than others. We've been speaking. There's been a lot of therapy in the community. We actually had therapy dogs come to our school. And overall, I think with speaking about political action, it has really helped our community cope as well, just because I think it's a way to channel everything that we're feeling into something productive for society.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And Lewis, I know that you have a very unique experience, because you're originally from Coventry in England and moved to Parkland 3 years ago. Do you want to share with us that perspective you have on being in a classroom where you've got to worry about guns?
Well, obviously, I grew up in England, and in English schools, the worst thing you can prepare for is that culinary sets something on fire. And it happens a lot, believe me. And so we all have to file out and prepare for the fire drill and stand in a courtyard to make sure we're safe. The idea that teachers, because my sister's a teacher in England, the idea that teachers would have to put their lives on the line to protect their students isn't something that really comes into consideration in England. And I remember speaking to my sister the day after it happened, and I asked her, I know you love your students, but could you imagine having to jump in front of a bullet for them? And I think that really stuck with her, and it stuck with me too, because teachers are there to educate their students. They shouldn't have to serve as the first line of defense between them and a rampant gunman on campus. And And it's the idea that we have to actively prepare for them, the idea that there is protocol in place to make sure that kids are protected when it happens, not to prevent it from happening, but to mitigate the damages of when it does, it's something that shouldn't ever happen. It's something that needs to be stopped. And these shootings have gone down as statistics now. There are statistic generators for these things. That needs to stop. We need to stop being desensitized to it. We need to start looking to, stop it before it happens. Don't prepare for when it does. And that's, my take on it.
Thank you. You're doing so much to campaign and raise awareness around gun violence, but also to drive change. Can you share with us some of the activities that you've been organizing leading up to the March of Our Lives?
Initially, a week after it happened, we planned a march in Tallahassee to meet state legislators and then to have a rally afterwards. And that was good because obviously in the United States, there's multiple levels of government, and so first wanted to change the state legislature, and so we met with a number of senators and House representatives there, and that was quickly followed by a CNN town hall back in Parkland the very same day, where we met with our senators and our representative at a federal level. And we spoke with them about a variety of issues, and thankfully, since it's happened, there has been a bill passed in the state of Florida. The NRA are now suing the state of Florida for passing it, but it has been passed, and hopefully a legal defense will protect it. But one of the things they said that stuck with me when we were up there was that more had happened in 1 week than had happened in 2 decades in gun control. And that was because of my classmates, and I think that's phenomenal.
To that, we also, this past Wednesday on March 14th, there was a national walkout, and there were students from all over our country who walked out of class in support of our movement to prevent gun violence. And it was just amazing to see the amount of support that we have across the country from everyone and anyone. It's incredible. And in addition to that, we've also, leading up to the march, we've been speaking and we've been calling and writing letters and emailing our representatives at the local, state, and federal levels as well.
Fantastic. I think we realized that after the shooting, once we had some days to grieve and comfort each other, that we still had the media here. There were still every single major news agency was still there looking for something to happen and see how we were recovering. But we took the opportunity to say, hey, look, we have the microphones right here. Let's go do something. Let's say something that will create change for the future. And luckily, some of our classmates went out, found the microphones, and spoke for what they believe in, and they spoke for a lot of values that we agree with, some of which we don't. We're all different people, but we all have the same message that we need to improve school safety and we need to fix the gun issue in the United States. So I think when we have the opportunity to speak, as many people here do, we should use that opportunity and use our voices to fight for what's right. We were lucky enough to have the media there for some of the days after the shooting, and they're still at home. But you guys have the media every single day. You can change the world with anything you say, and that's one of my callings to everyone here. Use your voice and speak for what's right.
What are your feelings about the government's response so far?
Well, I mean, the United States government is slow. Everything takes a long time to go through Congress and a couple months long process.
In its defense, it was designed that way. It was supposed to take time to pass these things, but when you have so much infighting among the country and the political divides are that deep, it makes it difficult to talk about with each other about basic issues. And so the idea of passing something as controversial as, gun reform, it's virtually impossible.
But like as Lewis mentioned earlier, in general, our state legislature has passed a bill called the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School Public Safety Act. It was dedicated to everything that we've been doing, and I think that shows that we are making a difference in terms of legislation and in terms of policy, but it's a slow process, especially at the national level.
And that was only because they had a deadline, because the state government closes after like a 2-month session, and the deadline was very soon after what happened and after we went to Tallahassee to speak to our state legislators. In Congress, we're still waiting for things to happen. There's been some promising bills, some that maybe we agree less with, but I think what we're advocating for now is we're going to take each little step, and soon they'll amount to what is great progress in terms of keeping the public safe from guns and from potential terrorists.
And what would be one of your most sort of priority achievements from all of this campaigning and work? What do you think is fundamental to achieve?
Obviously, there are a number of paths that can be taken regarding different legislation, because everyone has different ideas. But the one thing, because we've been asked a lot, what's our end goal? And how do you plan on getting there? We don't know how we plan on getting to it, but the end goal is that every child in the United States, and eventually across the world, is able to go to school and come home at the end of the day to their parents. That's the end goal.
I think that really sums up what we're trying to do, because in terms of specifics, like Kevin said and Lewis, we're taking the small steps as they come, and we want to have progress, but we also know that it takes time. And I think that we don't have something set in mind for an end goal, but we know that we're not going to stop until the public and schools are safe in general.
I mean, if we were going to talk about specifics, there are some things that we would like, for example, long guns that aren't just handguns, the age to purchase should be 21. We want to increase the broadness of background checks. Currently, there are a lot of agencies, state governments, local governments that don't report the information they receive about potentially dangerous people, and that has hurt a lot of people. So background checks is something that's very important to us. We would like to also reduce the amount of bullets that you can put in a gun at once. What we've seen in the past is that the time it takes for a shooter to reload gives potential victims the opportunity to escape, and that's something that's very important to us because it's something that is attainable and that can be done.
And especially with that as well, in the time it takes to reload, it also, in our case, the shooter's gun actually jammed as he was reloading, so it also gives more time for error, and something, unfortunately, it doesn't prevent what would have happened, but it would help minimize the damage that it would cause.
The biggest problem in the United States is that we have I wouldn't say it's a problem that we have the Second Amendment, but it's a problem that some people take it to the extremes, and they say, oh, I have my Second Amendment rights, I can believe that I have the right to own any gun, and it's not true, and we've seen in the past that there have been some regulations, you can't purchase an automatic gun, it has to be semi-automatic, meaning you have to press the trigger for each bullet to fire. But there are still guns that you can fire hundreds of rounds per minute. And what we're trying to do is, we don't want to ban guns necessarily, because we understand it's practically impossible to do. But we want to limit the accessibility of guns to criminals and to potential criminals. And we want to make sure that once they get their hands on those guns, they find it very difficult to fire indiscriminately as they.
And one of the things, obviously, because we've been studying American history and American government, the Declaration of Independence was written before the Constitution. And the Declaration of Independence guarantees every person on American soil the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The idea that an amendment added over 10 years later has the capacity to reverse those rights means that something needs to change about it. And so, hopefully we can bring about that
You described how the process is actually potentially quite slow. Do you think the momentum of your campaign will stay? Have you got plans on how to keep it going?
Well, obviously, we feel like everything that's happened so far has been culminating towards this march in Washington. But to anyone watching who thinks that maybe the NRA or the US government who's looking at this and thinking, we can ride the storm. Once the 24th comes and passes, we're home free. It's not. In stealing the words of our government teacher, this is a lifetime mission for us. This is going to be something we're going to fight for as long as we're here. And we're younger than the government and people are, so we're going to be here for a lot longer than they are. And so we're going to fight for change as long as we can.
Do you think there's anything that we can do to help you with that campaign? In this audience, you have got a range of teachers, school leaders, ministers, politicians. You've got education and business and philanthropical leaders as well. What can we do to support your aims?
I think one of the most important things that can be done in general is to support the youth, support their voices if they're trying to speak out, give them the platform to speak, and give them the opportunity to advocate for a cause that they're passionate about, even if it's not specifically our cause. It's important just for the older generations in general and people who have the power, even social media or like in any type of way in terms of business. But it's just really important that if a student wants to speak out, that they have the ability to, and that they can make a difference if they so choose.
And one of the things that was mentioned in one of these earlier discussions was about being a global citizen. And I think that the support we've had from around the world has shown that the future isn't as pessimistic as some people like to play it out to be. The idea that people from around the world are coming together to support us shows that we are going to be global citizens of the future. And I hope it continues, and I hope everyone in here, you look at your youth, because we're all human and we're all on this planet, and going into the future, we have to stand together. And the support that you and your youth have shown us shows that. And it's optimistic of a future where we can work together, where we can put aside our differences and work towards making, Earth a better place for everyone, whether it be laws or education or peace. We can work together, and people need to realize that, and that needs to be fostered in the youth of today and continued into the leaders of tomorrow.
So we're here in a conference and a forum that's exploring the classroom of 2030. You're talking to us about the basic right of being in a school that is safe, inviting, and nurturing. Is there anything that you want to advise us on what you think we need to prepare young people for in 2030 or take into account?
At least in our school and in our community, we're very encouraged to take leadership positions in schools, become the president of a club, become a president of an honor society, and show leadership among your peers on a small scale. We're encouraged to do that because the university process, they ask for leaders, and our school encourages that by giving us the opportunity to become leaders. So I think to everyone, I would say that encourage your students to become leaders, even in a small sense. They could be the president of a 5-person club. They can start a movement, even if it's a small movement within their school. I mean, we've seen hundreds of students from across the country start their own marches, start their own organizations to help end gun violence. And I ask everyone to give students those opportunities, give them the opportunity to go and speak out within the community, and you'll see that in the future that leadership from early on will transfer into the future.
Well, just like you were saying before, it's so important that every child has a right to go to school. Every child has a right to get an education and move forward in life and be able to have a good life in their future. And I think that it's so important to be educated, and to be educated in a productive sense would be to feel safe at school and to not have to worry about the type of situation we had to go through. No child should ever have to go through what we did, no person in general. But it is so important that even though we're talking about artificial intelligence and a ton of technology and innovation, I think that's so important. But at the same time, we need to cover the basics first. We need to make sure that our schools are safe.
I think they're amazing. I don't think I have to add anything to that. I think they covered all the bases. No, it's true. If we're going to change the world, and if we're going to build a future where we can all continue to move off into what's right now unimaginable, to move into the future, we need to make sure that every kid is safe to get an education, because an education is how we move into that future. Mm-hmm. And as technology continues to surpass us, we have to make sure that we as people are able to keep up to pace with it. And the only way to do that is through education, and that's why it's so important. Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much for joining us today. It's an absolute privilege to hear your reflections. You are remarkable young people. You're change makers. You are defining the future. And it's absolutely incredible to know that you're role models for your peers, but you are very determined to make sure that change will happen, however long it takes. And please know we're here carrying your viewpoint with us now. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, please join me. Stand up for a round of applause for Louis, Susanna, and Kevin. Please stay standing and join us as we pay our respects with a moment of silence to the 17 students and teachers that tragically lost their lives on the 14th of February, 2018 in Parkland, Florida. Thank you for sharing your respect. And thank you again to Louis, Susanna, and Kevin.